The Toronto Maple Leaf season is over too soon yet again. David Morassutti of Locked On Leafs tells us why this happened and what we can expect from Toronto in what should be a very pivotal offseason.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL Podcast. Gil Martin, so glad you could be with us today. And we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Don't forget to subscribe to Locked On NHL on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, so you can get the new episodes as they drop. And we are now available on SiriusXM on the SXM app. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show David Morassutti of Locked On Leafs. And David, I wish it was under better circumstances for your team, but another disappointing playoff for the Toronto Maple Leafs. What's the mood like in Toronto right now?
I think frustrated. I think frustrated is probably the best word, just because, you had a team that finally got over that round one hump, thinking that this was going to lead to, this team realizing its potential, but only to have a similar fate fall on them in the second round, to a team losing to a team on paper that you should be better than, losing to players that frankly are just not that much better than what the Leafs players have, but did the little things right, played the style of hockey that thrives in the playoffs. And unfortunately, the Leafs just got outworked, and just, a lot of frustration from fans wondering, why is it the same old story with this team yet again?
So, it's been a long time since the Leafs went to a conference final. We know they haven't won a Stanley Cup since 1967. The talent is clearly there on this roster. So what do you expect to change as a result of what happened in the playoffs yet again?
Yeah, that's really the big question here, is that, it's not, a lot of fans will say trade this player, trade that player, do this and do that. But when it comes to trading players, you're never really, like, if you're going to trade, I hear people say trade Auston Matthews, and I say, you're trading Auston Matthews, you're losing that trade, because no matter what you're getting back, you're not getting a player better than Auston Matthews, and teams aren't exactly going to just give the Leafs whatever they want for Auston Matthews, because that's just not with the salary cap the way it is and all of those factors. You're just never going to win those sort of in those scenarios. My question here, and what I wonder is, did the message get stale with this group? Are they not prepared? Were they not prepared right by the head coach? Are they not being held accountable enough, right? And the big one for me was, during the season, Sheldon Keefe had an opportunity to hold his players accountable when they lost, I believe it was to the Arizona Coyotes. One of those teams that their Leafs were clearly better than. I think it was the Coyotes, and I think the Coyotes beat them pretty bad. And he had the opportunity to call out his star players for not putting in the effort. He sort of did that, but then he walked it back the day after. And to me, right there, that's not what an NHL coach is supposed to do. I look at the teams that are successful. Their head coaches are holding their star players accountable. I think that's an issue here in Toronto. If it's a mentality, a thing where the coach has to think about the mental aspect of his team, and if they can handle that criticism, I'm sorry, then they're not in the right business, right? They're being paid a lot of money. In some cases, a lot of people believe they're being overpaid to do a job that they haven't gotten done, right? Like, they're not being paid over $10 million to be good in the regular season. They're being paid that to show up in the playoffs and elevate their game and realize that they are among the best players in the league. And so, like, that's the frustrating part, is that if they, let's say, bring in a new coach and a new GM, is that going to change everything? I don't know, right? That's the big question there, is that, does this team can they have that switch in mentality? And that's why I think you have to really, really consider making some moves, but you also have to realize you can't just change everything, right? You have to be calculated with it because, this is a team that still can compete, right? It's not like this is a team that barely got into the playoffs, but it's also one that clearly needs a real kick in the rear, if you ask a lot of fans as well.
So do we see a coaching change, in your opinion, this offseason?
Yeah, I think that's got to be the first one there. Like Sheldon Keefe has had, his first season didn't, it ended it with the COVID-19 pandemic impacting things. So that first postseason wasn't even a postseason; it was the play-in round. Like that's just a really tough situation for a new coach to come into and try to handle that. It's the other cracks at it. It's the Montreal series, it's the Tampa series, it's those failed attempts before that really screamed to me that he's not able to get this group to buy in the way that he needs them to, right? Like Paul Maurice, very experienced coach, doesn't have the better players than Sheldon Keefe, but he found a way to game plan and outcoach Sheldon Keefe. And I think in a lot of ways, even John Cooper outcoached Sheldon Keefe in the first round, but the Leafs got the bounces and the luck that went their way, and they beat the Tampa Bay Lightning. But yeah, Sheldon Keefe has done some good things. I just think that he hasn't gotten this team to buy into playing the right way in the playoffs. And that falls there, it falls on the players, but it also falls on coaching too. And I'm seeing some former Leafs that were coaches, Dave Hackstall, now with Seattle. Like that team is doing pretty well for themselves, and they don't have the team that the Leafs have, right? So I think you can look at that and say, you know what, maybe that's the one thing that for sure has to change, and that's the head coach.
How about the GM? I know his contract is reportedly up this offseason. Does he come back?
Well, and that's the first thing is not only do the Leafs want him back, but does Kyle Dubas want to come back? Right. He's going to have offers. There are teams right now looking for a GM. I'm looking at Pittsburgh. I'm looking at Calgary. That will definitely look at Kyle Dubas, because there's one thing Kyle Dubas has done that a lot of people have recognized. He identifies an issue and he tries to fix it, whether that's trading and trying to upgrade the defense, trying to get solutions for the goaltending situation. Like Kyle Dubas has done what he can to try to fix those things. But where Kyle Dubas as a GM has really got question marks is, can he make those tough decisions when it comes to his core? Because he's put his belief in the core. He gave them the contracts that they all, he paid them a lot of money. And because of how much they're paid, it does hamstring the Leafs into doing other things, right? So I think Kyle Dubas deserves the chance to see if he is willing to make the tough moves that need to be made to get this team over the hump. But if he's not willing to do that, if he just feels like, you know what, I've done what I can with this group, there's just not much more I can do, then he would leave. But part of me thinks he likes that challenge. He wants to see this through, and he wants to make this team take that team to as far as to the Stanley Cup. It's just whether or not there's belief within whoever's making that decision. Brandon Shanahan will be making that decision, or maybe somebody above him will be making that decision. But that's going to be the very tough move. In my opinion, that's going to be the biggest move going forward.
You talked about the core players and then, leadership from the coach. How about leadership from the captain, from the leaders on the ice? Do you think that needs to improve, and will there be changes there?
Well, and I think that's a big one there. Like John Tavares has done a lot of good things in Toronto. He's not the biggest talker, right? That's why when he was named captain, there were people who believed that it wasn't the right choice, because you need that voice in the room. Because whenever the Leafs have had a bad period, I always think back to when Patrick Marleau's here. It was always Patrick Marleau that got that team to wake up with the big speech. Jason Spezza was another guy that did that. It wasn't really John Tavares, from what I've heard, right? So I think, Tavares, he's not invisible. He's putting in effort. I think Auston Matthews is the same way, but I also think there's too many guys that do too much of the same thing and aren't leading by example enough. And when you got too many guys like that making the big money, the other players are like, well, if they're not really going to do it, are we going to do it? Like, that mentality does come in a little bit. I don't think that was the least problem, but I also think that if the players are going to be too complacent, then you got to change the mix somehow, and it's going to be a very tough thing to do because this core is still locked in for at least the next couple of years.
Going to be an interesting offseason, no doubt about that. David, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yep, you can go and follow the podcast wherever you get your podcast from, Locked On Leafs, and also help us get those subscribers up on YouTube. Unfortunately, the Leafs being limited kind of doesn't help with that, but we definitely have a lot of discussion about what's going to be happening going forward. You can follow me also on Twitter at @the_Morassutti, so you can follow me there and get more of the Leafs analysis there.
David, thanks so much for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you with killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee. You could stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. Forget planning months in advance. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed.